Well, we're now in our 6th week of physical distancing, and it's a humbling thing to be a part of a nationwide lockdown to curb the influence of this devastating global virus. If there's one thing we have now that we didn't perceive that we had before, it's time. One of the most familiar exchanges in small talk is when someone asks how you're doing, and the classic response is, "I'm fine, but busy." And usually that's responded with something similar. We are perpetually, or have been perpetually busy. But all of a sudden, we find ourselves unable to extend our stock reply of busyness when someone asks how we're doing. Because busyness, in many ways, has been stripped away from us. For many, our work schedules have been drastically altered, and our commute times don't exist as we work from home. For families, extracurricular activities for the kids have been canceled, so we're not running around each night just trying to get the kids to each event that they have going on. Even our church attendance, it's been altered. We're gathering online as we sit in our homes, on our couches with our coffees, and then carry on our day. So a lot of what we had that we was used to fill our time has now been replaced. It's interesting, right? Because while we have this newfound time, more than what we know to do with some days, we're also increasingly mindful of the fragility of life and the limits of time. Both our physical frailty and the frailty of the world around us, it's exposed, and idols, these worldly idols, they can vanish and be destroyed instantaneously. The question I want to first ask is, what has been replacing your time? With things being stripped away from us, how have you been spending your time? Has it been gluing yourself to the news, holding on to every bit of good or negative news and having your emotions pulled by that? Is it clinging on to what that means for us and what's next? Has it been binging on the latest sports documentary, and there's a really good one that's just come out, or gaming late and sleeping in until the afternoon hours? Where are our thoughts at, and how is our time being spent while we're in isolation? I think a lot is revealed about where our thoughts are at during this time, and also what we're doing to replace all these things that have been kind of pulled from us and what we're spent doing. When my father-in-law was first diagnosed with terminal cancer, the Lord brought to my heart a sermon that Pastor Rick Reed, or Dr. Rick Reed, spoke at Emmanuel's 90th anniversary, and it was on Psalm 90. And a particular verse within that psalm actually is one that the Lord just kept bringing me to and has become a regular prayer in my life. And if you attend Sundays here at Emmanuel, you've probably even heard me quote this psalm before. But the particular prayer is found in verse 12, where Moses says, "Teach me to number my days that I may get a heart of wisdom." Teach me to number my days that I may get a heart of wisdom. There's a couple of really significant things that God has done in my heart as I've prayed through this verse and really desired God to teach me this, is that the first thing is to not have some sort of visionary insight into how long of a life I'll live. When I ask God to teach me to number my days, it's not that, okay, let me see my end, so that I can plan accordingly, but it's to have a right perspective of this earthly reality, this humbling reality that life is fragile and it's short, that, as James says, our life is like a vapor. A heart of wisdom comes from that humble recognition of who we actually are. And I think that if we get that, if we have that right perspective, that is reflected through wise action. Paul says in Ephesians 5, he says, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time." When we really recognize that life is a vapor, that we are fragile, and we're humbled by that reality, wise action follows that we want to make the most of that, not for our name's sake, or personal wealth and accumulation, or control, or comfort, and all these things, but the directive is towards the glory of God. The directive is to know the one who actually offers us hope, and the one in whom our soul really longs for. In light of how short our time is, I think we need to take an inventory of how to best spend that time. During social isolation, what are we doing? I want to ask these questions directed to the inward life and to our hearts. How is God using this time in your life to make you look more like Jesus? How are you intentionally and intensifying your pursuit of Jesus through this? With all this time that we have and the unknown of how many days we have and how fragile life is, how is God being prioritized in your life and in your family's life and in your time together? Are you spending time with him one-on-one? Are you praying with your family? How are you exemplifying godly wisdom with how your time is spent? How am I doing that with how my time is spent? Can I invite you to pray through Psalm 90, verse 12 with me? And within this prayer, could you pray that God would give us right understanding of our fragility, that we wouldn't be driven by despair, knowing that we will face death, but that we would be humbled and turn to him as the one who's conquered it, and knowing that we'll be with him forever. Can we also pray that we wouldn't just, ride this thing out, clinging to the end goal when the barriers of social distance are removed, just longing for that day, for those to be removed, and just clinging to that hope, that we wouldn't feel like we're holding on to every piece of positive or negative news, but that we would be driven to God with urgency and delight, that we would grow through this and reflect back on this time and marvel at the glory of his grace, that in reflecting on this, we would be encouraged and celebratory of the grace and sanctifying work of God in our lives. There's a lot of content out there, and obviously this is one of those moments where you're getting more content. But my encouragement for this week to you is to prioritize time in the Word with your family and praying together or individually, one-on-one. Make that a priority. There are countless reading plans on the Bible app that you can download and other ways to be accountable with others in that. I would urge you, nurture and pursue Christ through this. Nurture a relationship with him. Secondly, for parents, Amanda Henderson has done an amazing job with our kids community. She's been sending a Kids at Home newsletter with discipleship curriculum that you can work through with your kids at home. Prioritize Christ in your family's life. I would encourage you, please access that resource and use it. Not just for the content, but for tools for discipleship and building up and centering your lives on Christ in the home. We also have our 30 Day of Prayer coming up. We're going to be praying specifically for the Muslim world every evening from 6:30 to 7. And I would encourage you, reach out to Pastor Matt if you want more information about that. And lastly, we have our missional communities that gather online. This is a great opportunity to have accountability and pursue Christ with like-minded believers. I know there's a lot here, even in terms of options. But the thing that we want to express to you is just, please look to Christ. With this extra time that we have, fight the tendency towards laziness or complacency. Ask God that he would expose blind spots in our hearts through this. Seek Jesus. That's our prayer, and we're confident that God is going to do something beautiful, that he is doing something beautiful in and through our lives during this time.